Are you struggling to manage your interactions with your ex or your soon to be ex now that you're separated or divorced? In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you 4 types of personal boundaries that you must set with your ex or soon to be ex if you want to thrive and find peace in your next chapter. I'll also be sharing some quick tips on how to kindly set boundaries and maintain them in all your relationships. That's all coming right up. Hi friends, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here and you haven't subscribed yet, please click the subscribe button below and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post a new video about relationship advice, personal growth, and healing after heartbreak. And also follow me on Instagram where I share weekly tips that you won't find here on YouTube. Now on to the main topic of this video. Setting healthy personal boundaries is especially important if you still have to deal with your ex and have to interact with one another although you're separated and divorced. Maybe you chose to end the relationship with your ex, but your ex still keeps trying to bid for your time and attention, and you just really want to be able to move on. Or maybe you're divorced, but you have children together, so now you have to co parent together, and you can't simply just cut one another off. Whatever your situation may be, boundaries will help you create safety in this situation. I've helped many of my clients navigate this tricky transition, and I'm excited to be able to share some tips with you too so that you too can start feeling more comfortable with setting boundaries and having more peace of mind moving forward. Before we jump into talking about the different types of personal boundaries and tips on how to set boundaries, let's first discuss what boundaries are. Boundaries are limits, rules, and expectations that we set for ourselves and others. They're based on how we feel we should be treated and how others should behave. Boundaries can depend on the type of relationship. And we'll have different boundaries for the people we work with, other boundaries for our intimate partners, and with family members too. And when our boundaries are crossed and invaded, we feel unsafe. We feel disempowered and possibly even threatened. Our stress response is triggered because of the violation. So we immediately jump into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn mode. We feel anxious and we also feel hyper vigilant. And depending on what your experiences were with boundaries growing up, it can be scary to set boundaries. If your thoughts and your emotions were constantly disregarded, then you don't necessarily know what you want or how you feel. You probably assume that it doesn't matter because people are not going to take it seriously anyway. If your boundaries have been constantly violated in relationships, you often feel hopeless, helpless, and misunderstood, and maybe even taken for granted. Setting boundaries tends to be hard for us because we don't want to be rejected. Many of us want to avoid conflict, so we go along with others. And this can easily turn into people pleasing behavior and wanting to be seen as nice and agreeable to the point of self sacrificing to avoid rejection and abandonment. The more we do this, though, the more we do feel disregarded and that our wants and needs don't really matter. And that's mainly because we haven't communicated what our boundaries are. Others aren't mind readers. They don't necessarily know what is important to us and what's acceptable because we haven't made that clear or stood by them. So if you're struggling with boundary setting, I want you to know that you're not being harsh or a mean person for setting boundaries. Boundaries are actually a great way to honor your needs and create safety and peace of mind and clearly define what your expectations are moving forward. That's what a healthy boundary looks like, as opposed to weak boundaries that tend to lead to mistreatment and disrespect, where others try to see how far they can push you. Or on the other end, rigid boundaries that are more like brick walls that keep others out at a major distance to avoid vulnerability and to protect ourselves. You can't control anyone. You can't make them do or not do something, or you can't avoid their behaviors, but it's fully within your power to set boundaries and to communicate what's okay and what isn't for you. And it's important to do this to feel safe in the relationship and the interactions. Share in the comments below what your personal boundaries are, whether they're healthy, weak, or rigid boundaries, so that we can support one another. Okay, so when you're dealing with an ex, the first type of boundary to set is around communication. Boundaries around communications are about the way you communicate with one another. This involves the frequency of contact, the method you use to communicate, the context, and the tonality too. This boundary is more effective when you're having a hard time communicating with your ex without there being some type of conflict. If you're on good terms with your ex and you're friendly with one another, then you can adjust the boundaries as necessary. It doesn't have to be so rigid in that case. So let's say your communication with your ex tends to be strained and contentious most of the time. Then be sure to keep all communications on an as needed basis and limited to only what's necessary, such as maybe for the kids, so the parenting decisions, emergencies, and visitations. Communication should be businesslike and mainly transactional. And it helps to communicate with your ex in writing or brief phone calls when necessary. There's also some co parenting apps like My Family Wizard or Talking Parents that keep track of the communication so that it helps to be aware of what's said and how things are being communicated, because that communication log could end up in the hands of the judge or the court. So that way you have to be careful of what you say so it isn't used against you. Along those same lines is to speak to one another in respectful ways. Some conversations can be emotionally triggering. When you notice the conversation's getting intense and your ex starts to speak to you in inappropriate ways, you're allowed to end the conversation. Make it clear that you expect that both of you will speak to one another in respectful ways and you will not tolerate anything less or the conversation's over. I also want to add here are boundaries around what's said around the children. They love their mom and dad, and they shouldn't be subjected to hearing negative things about the other parents. They shouldn't be messengers sending messages back and forth or any sort of communication that places the other parent in a bad light. So, not only does there need to be boundaries around you and how you and your ex communicate, there also needs to be even firmer boundaries that protects the children and their relationship with the other parent. Type number two are personal boundaries around your personal space and how you use your time. This also includes your home and your physical environment as well as your privacy. If you're still living together, it's important to make it clear how you'll manage the living arrangements, who will be sleeping where, how the common areas will be managed, and what you don't want to be touched. If you're co-parents, there may be times that both parents will need to be flexible and work with each other and as well as the kids' schedules. Your ex may need you to step in to watch the kids, let's say, while he takes care of other things or vice versa. That happens very often. So it's fine and it's encouraged to work together like this. But if your ex asks you to help with other things that are unrelated to the children, offering a helping hand when you genuinely want to is okay. And there's really nothing wrong with that. I would just suggest getting clear with yourself why and to what extent you're willing to help and establish clear boundaries around that so you aren't overextending yourself or doing things that you may not necessarily want to do and then feeling disappointed or resentful. You're not together anymore, so you don't need to be involved in each other and what you each of you have going on unless of course it affects the children. Type number three are personal boundaries in your new roles. An example of boundaries in your new roles is not looking to each other for advice and support, for example. Many exes may still be on good terms and may be friendly with one another, which is great. If you still love each other and care for your ex, it can be easy to fall back into old ways of how you used to be. But if you're looking to move on and leave the past in the past, then having boundaries that will establish what's okay and what isn't in your new roles will be important. Since you're no longer married or together, it helps to clearly define your new ways of interacting with one another. You're not a wife anymore, so you don't need to do the same things that you used to do for each other while you were still married. And if you're looking to move on and only maintain a co parenting relationship, for example, it's best if both of you have support from other family, friends, professionals, therapists, so that you aren't relying on each other for emotional support like you did in the past. Type number four is personal boundaries around what you think and how you feel. Everyone's entitled to their own thoughts and emotions. You know what your emotions are. You know how you feel about something or what you think about it. You can understand and empathize with your ex's thoughts and feelings, but you don't need to take them on as your own or vice versa. This is where you can also each have your own thoughts and opinions about something, and you can agree to disagree without encroaching on each other's boundaries. Now, this can be challenging sometimes when, let's say, you have to co parent, but you can't both agree on what needs to get done and how it needs to be handled. This is when you'd have to see what your non negotiables are and what you're willing to compromise on. That's also why it's important to know what your values are and why they're important so that you can see if you need to have more firm boundaries or if you can be flexible. Let's talk about some ways that you can effectively set healthy boundaries. In some situations, it's best to just avoid them altogether, and you may just need to walk away, no explanations given. This is usually done in situations that are toxic. Maybe there's severe abuse or mistreatment. Getting to safety is what's most important. In other cases, though, especially if you have to co parent, you will need to establish or reestablish boundaries so that it's clear what's tolerated and what isn't, as well as what the consequences will be when boundaries are violated. So here's how you can do this. When you're talking about what boundaries are crossed, first start by validating your ex's point of view. Everybody wants to be seen and heard. And often, if you give them that simple acknowledgement, it changes the tone. So you can say things like, I know you're just trying to help, or I know this is important to you, or I can see that this bothers you. This sets a friendly tone to the conversation. Next, you want to identify what action or behavior you want your ex to stop doing. Calmly and clearly state what they did that you didn't like in a very matter of fact way. A simple, direct statement works well. The third step is to express how their behavior makes you feel. Do you feel attacked, unsafe, disrespected, hurt, or violated in some way? It's okay to state that. Some people will shy away from this because it requires a certain level of vulnerability, but it helps to show exactly how your ex's behavior is being received by you. The fourth step is to clearly identify why you're setting that boundary. Are you trying to avoid future misunderstandings or prevent an argument, or just simply you want to have a decent co parenting relationship? It helps to be clear on this so that you can effectively communicate that. And step number five is to state what behaviors you want to see instead. What is acceptable behavior for you? And lastly, communicate what will happen if they don't comply. What are the consequences? Will you walk away and disengage? They need to know what they can expect so that they aren't surprised when you do impose the consequence. There's no need to feel guilty about setting boundaries. It's actually a very loving thing you can do for yourself. This is an act of honoring your values and your needs. You deserve to be treated well. And boundaries do just that. They show others how you need to be treated and what a healthy interaction looks like for you. If you're afraid of your ex's reactions and maybe they'll get aggressive or they'll be defensive or emotional, then realize that their reaction has really nothing to do with you. It has more to do with what's going on for them. Usually it's their ego that's triggered. Maybe it's their need for power and control, or they just don't want to feel like they're being told that they did something wrong. So don't take it personally. Let them process it and deal with it on their own. And remember that setting boundaries can be intimidating at first if you're not used to it, but with practice, it does get easier. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this. Until next time, I'll see you later. Take care.